Personal freedom is fundamental to who we are as Americans.
If you believe in freedom, what you're saying is we should be who we are, that you trust people to do the right thing. So you don't need to, for example, surveil them the whole time and steal their data, right? In February, the Biden administration urged Congress to renew a warrantless surveillance law that allows the government to collect messages and phone data of Americans without court order. That amounts to without judicial process and without your consent. When it comes to saying it, he believes it. When it comes to legislating, he's against it. Could there be any more literal interpretation of freedom than not locking people in cages? I don't think so. Let's have a look at his record on incarceration. Biden pledged he'd cut incarceration in half. During his administration, the federal prison population has grown for the first time in a decade. So in spite of all that stuff, I feel like I remember, do you? Let me know in the comments and chat that he says stuff like, it's wrong that African Americans make up such a large percentage of the prison population. Something that I frankly believe in strongly. Well, guess what? The prison population is increasing. I suppose it's just a coincidence that large corporations use prison labor as cheap labor to increase their profits. It can't be connected to that because Joe Biden believes in freedom. You heard him say it, didn't you? He couldn't be lying.
But you know, around the country, MAGA extremists are lining up to take on those bedrock freedoms.
Much of this is clearly an attempt to address the idea that their opponents are extreme. The idea of extremity is, of course, subjective. What is extreme? What might be extreme to you may not be extreme to me when it comes to personal practice around culture, sexuality, ideology. These are things that we have to be able to, as much as possible, determine as individuals, of course, always with the caveat that we don't harm anybody else. But if Joe Biden loathes MAGA America so much and the MAGA movement so deeply, you would be sure, right, that he would never, under any circumstances at all, use Democrat Party funding to underwrite the campaign of MAGA candidates. I mean, that would be hypocritical, disingenuous, evidence that you've got no real morality, that you're just the careerist strategist who cares about serving corporate interests and will get into government no matter what, even if it involves paying for the campaigns of the people you claim to hate, amplifying messages that you think, you believe, you say you believe, are harming America. So paying for their advertisements, their commercials, that would be off limits, right? Wrong. Democrats spent tens of millions amplifying far-right, they call them far-right, candidates in 9 states in an attempt to ensure their candidates face less appealing opponents in the general election. You might be a cynical, jaded individual and say, well, that's brilliant strategy. If you genuinely believe that the messaging of these, as they say, far-right candidates is negative, then you wouldn't want to amplify that messaging because more people are going to be subject to it. If you believe that they're racist or homophobic or against people's identities and culture later on in this piece of propaganda, the right to love who you want to love, you wouldn't amplify voices that were against that, would you? You'd want to oppose those ideas. That's why this piece of propaganda is so galling.
Cutting Social Security that you paid for your entire life while cutting taxes for the very wealthy.
Right, so it's wrong to cut taxes for the very wealthy. Have we found a principle? Have we found a principle in there? Let's have a look at the facts. The Democrats' Build Back Better bill is a gigantic tax cut for millionaires and billionaires. Under Biden, Democratic lawmakers pushed a regressive proposal to allow wealthy property owners to deduct more of their state and local taxes, aka SALT, from their federal taxes. This initiative provides almost no benefit to the working class, but enriches their already rich donors. Another example of using rhetoric to appeal to your audience while legislating on behalf of your donors. You know how this works, don't you? You don't need me to tell you this, but it's nice to see it all in one place, isn't it? It's nice to contrast it with their propaganda, isn't it?
Banning books and telling people who they can love.
So the culture war that they claim is so bad, they stoke it on 2 sides. 1, they fund people that say stuff that they claim is hateful. 2, they use provocative imagery in their own propaganda. They ain't about healing America. They're about breaking America because they benefit from the fracture. Your wounds are their treasure.
Dictating what healthcare decisions women can make.
One of the things the Biden administration is always banging on about is healthcare. Well, here's a fact. 15 million American people are currently being quietly phased out of receiving Medicaid and Children's Health Insurance Program benefits. Just quietly phasing them out. They won't make much noise because they're ill.
All while making it more difficult for you to be able to vote.
Well, we know now that when it comes to claiming that elections are fraudulent, the Democrats are just the same as Donald Trump. When the Democrats lose, they claim that there are fraudulent electoral machines, broker machines, Russian hacking. They'll say whatever they want to say. Whoever wins the next election, whether it's this guy, whoever else the other party put up, the one that wins will say, thank you, we're going to heal America, while legislating on behalf of their rich donors. And the side that loses will go, Electoral fraud. In October 2021, Democrats scaled back plans for a crackdown on tax cheating, bowing to an aggressive lobbying campaign by the banking industry. So who do they work for? Do they work for all these construction workers and people of various colours and identities, who I believe they should be working for, by the way, that we should be healing America, that we should be accepting diversity, inclusivity. All these words they use are, in my opinion, the right words, as long as you include that people want to live differently all along the spectrum of different identities and cultural values. As long as you accept that, we're all cool, aren't we? They bow to the pressure of the lobbying industry. You know that. That's why there is a lobbying industry. And never forget this electoral pledge, because it's certainly more reliable than any other pledge Biden made. Joe Biden told rich donors on the campaign trail that nothing would fundamentally change if he were elected president. Great work, Joe. 4 more years. For much of the last decade, Democrats complained that Republicans were backed by dark money. Then came the 2020 election, where donors and operatives allied with the Democratic Party embraced dark money, surpassing Republicans in 2020 spending. One thing we've got to stop is this dark money. Or, I don't know, maybe we could use dark money ourselves and more than our opponents. Dark money is good.
When I ran for president 4 years ago, I said we're in a battle for the soul of America.
Often the rhetoric is correct. We are in a battle for the soul of America, for the soul of the world, but you can't access the soul without some spiritual values. And if you don't believe in spirituality, you know that I do. What you need are just moral principles: kindness, service, gratitude, community, ideas that you can't just change depending on your required outcome. We cannot allow these MAGA voices. Here's some money for some MAGA voices. We cannot stoke this culture war. Stoke the culture war. We have to legislate on behalf of ordinary Americans. Thank you for the banking money. We're gonna crush ordinary Americans. You have to have principles that cost you.
And we still are. The question we're facing is whether in the years ahead we have more freedom or less freedom.
Certainly you're going to have less sick days, in spite of his pledge to ensure that American workers would have 7 days per year sick days available to them. Is another pledge broken. As part of his 2020 presidential campaign, Biden pledged that he would ensure all workers have at least 7 paid sick days. In December, Biden and the US Congress forced workers to accept an agreement without sick days and made a rail strike illegal. Fortunately, it didn't lead to an ecological disaster involving trains careering off of the tracks and spilling chemicals all over the environment, which, as you know, the Democrats love so much. The rail industry's lobbying group, this is just a coincidence, probably not relevant. Rail industry's lobbying group spent more than $13 million lobbying Congress, but that probably doesn't make a difference, right?